And the other reason that he's so out of favor at this point is because he called for the split between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. He set that in motion and named the two factions. And people are saying, you know, we're all committed to one party for the proletarian class, which is one class. And we let the Jewish Bund walk out, and we let the workers' cause walk out because they wanted to have their own factions. And then Lenin goes and sets up his own factions. And so he's criticized heavily at this point. And he writes, his next book after What Is to Be Done is called One Step Forward, Two Steps Back. And he explains his version of events and critiques the Menshevik faction and the party at large, and then feels like he did a good job of defending himself, and this brings down more heat on him because people accuse him of, in the first book, What Is to Be Done, of arguing that party criticism is not to be allowed, that it's counterproductive. And then his next book, they charge, is nothing but criticism of the party and of the Menshevik faction. So this further alienates him from even many of his supporters. And if anybody who's read either of these wants to jump in on this afterwards, I would love that, because I haven't read What Is to Be Done or One Step Forward, Two Steps Back yet.
Well, for What Is to Be Done, he specifically criticizes those who would criticize the party without being constructive towards the party. Like, people that just want to say, hey, these party policies are a joke, et cetera, without being like, okay, here's what we should be doing instead of what we're doing now. Does that make a difference?
If I can just add and clarify. Lenin is against what was at that time called, quote unquote, freedom of criticism, right? And his point is this: if all you want is the ability to criticize, no one wants just the ability to criticize. What they want is they want a wrong policy to be replaced with a right policy. So all of these people who are arguing for freedom of criticism aren't in fact arguing for any right policy. They're just criticizing essentially to wreck the party. Does that?
Yeah.
Pretty much. So that's sort of
it's literally the first section of What Is to Be Done.
So, oh, the other thing I was going to mention is that when he sets up those party rules that he and Martov disagree on, he's trying to set up party rules that will disallow people who are not revolutionaries from joining the party and outvoting those who are revolutionary. And of course, so it reminded me of our own constitution that we have here for our group. And you see, almost all political groups do this as well, even like Democrats and Republicans. They want to be able to form, or even the Black Panther Party or whoever it is, they want to be able to form their own policies for their own group and not have an influx. I mean, theoretically, we could have, 20 college Republicans come in next week and vote for something. And so it's a measure of self-control over the constitutional proceedings of your own group. And so that's how Lenin sees it with his regulations for party membership. So after the Congress, I'm going to skip ahead here. There's the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 and 1905. And all the problems throughout the empire are just exacerbated through this war. There's less resources to go around. Anytime there's famines or droughts in the middle of a war, people are starving. And so the tide is turning ever more and more against the Romanov dynasty and against the Tsar. Interestingly, just as a side note, Lenin argues during the Russo-Japanese War that revolutionaries should not support the Russian dynasty, but should not take sides against the Japanese. And then this is a stand he'll also elaborate on in the Great War, in World War I, where he feels like the Russian Empire is imperialistic and that it would be counter-revolutionary to support his own government in World War I. And he'll write a book called, I think it's called like Imperialism as the Highest
Stage of Capitalism.
Stage of Capitalism. And so he argues against supporting the Russian government in World War I. December of 1904, Lenin is on a letter-writing campaign, and he's networking as much as possible, and he's trying to convince the members of the Bureau of Committees of the majority that a reconciliation with the Mensheviks is either A, impossible, or B, anathema to revolutionary aims. However, he's outvoted. The Central Committee disagrees, and they set up plans for the Third Party Congress, and they're hoping to reconcile the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. Then on January 9th, 1905, there's what is referred to as Bloody Sunday. And a large congregation of Russians proceeded down the main road to the emperor's palace, and that included a lot of families, a lot of children, and at the head of it was a lot of ecclesiastical leaders. And they were bearing a petition to the emperor. And in their petition, they wanted universal civil rights and only a degree of democratic representation. They weren't even asking for universal suffrage, but just like an elected body that would afford them a degree of democratic representation. And the crowd was fired upon, and there was a massacre, and public opinion further tips away from the ruling from the Tsar's dynasty. And Lenin is he's not in Russia at the time, and so they're getting news, like they're getting piecemeal news, and it's really sketchy, and they're trying to learn what is going on over there. And his initial reaction is to claim that now more than ever the Bolsheviks need to oust the Mensheviks. However, Lenin's approach seems to change between December of 1904 through January of 1905, around the time of the Bloody Revolution. It changes between then and April of 1905 when the Third Party Congress convenes. And Lenin has a new approach on several specifics. And apparently it surprises a lot of people at the Congress, because he hadn't been voicing these until he showed up at the Congress. One of his is he wants more land appropriation for the peasants. Previously he had been focusing primarily on gains for the industrial working class and had not been writing as much about land appropriation. He had a small plan for a small land appropriation, but he expands that after meeting the Christian revolutionary Father Gapon, and he admires Father Gapon, and they have conversations, and Lenin kind of changes some of his views and learns to respect Christian revolutionaries a little bit more. So the Third Party Congress opens up, and most of the party are trying to bridge the schism between Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. They think Lenin is going to be completely opposed to this. Many of the Mensheviks don't even show up. They have their own meeting in Geneva instead. But Lenin, at this party, makes some modifications. And I'll talk about some of the rationale for why he may have made these and what Service thinks. But he regains a lot of his former prestige at this party congress that he hasn't had for the last 2 years. And there are three kind of possible reasons. Well, actually, I'll go over two, because this is going on and on and on. Okay. One possible reason that Lenin may have changed his proposals and his tactics and his emphases was just the sheer disagreements that he was encountering from almost everyone, even Bolshevik supporters, on one particular or another, and the way that he had been marginalized within the party. And so it may be that he amends some of his proposals for that reason. Service kind of like almost unanimously thinks that Lenin just changes his tactics just to be politically expedient, that Lenin doesn't really have a core set of values or objectives, that it's basically one giant ego trip. But I think in kind of reading some other sources, what actually happened was around the time of What Is to Be Done, Lenin feels like we need to have a central party that will give instruction to the industrial class, and the industrial class will then give instruction to actually I skipped a step, a central party that will give instruction to local party leaders. Local party leaders will give instruction to the industrial working class. The industrial working class will then be the kind of vanguard for the other sub-demographics in society, like the peasantry, students, etc.